My name is Natalie, 35 years old, and I never imagined my husband would publicly humiliate me in front of the entire company we built together. When Richard suspended me for not apologizing to his ex-girlfriend, I felt the burn of betrayal like never before. That night, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. By morning, the company we built was mine alone, and the look on Richard's face when he realized what I'd done still gives me a bittersweet satisfaction. Before I share how I turned the tables on my CEO husband overnight, drop a like and subscribe to this channel. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Trust me, if you've ever been underestimated or betrayed by someone you loved, this story will remind you that sometimes the best revenge is simply reclaiming what was yours all along. 6 years ago, I was sitting in a small cubicle at Nexus Technologies, a mid-sized software company in Seattle, staring at lines of code that wouldn't cooperate. With my computer science degree and 3 years of experience, I had expected to move up faster, but the company's leadership remained an impenetrable boys' club. As I rubbed my tired eyes, my cubicle neighbor Kevin wheeled his chair over. "Another late night?" he asked, offering me a coffee from his personal stash. The good kind, not the watery break room variety. "This security patch is kicking my butt," I admitted, gratefully accepting the cup. "But I think I've almost got it." Kevin nodded appreciatively. "That's what makes you different from half the team. You actually care about getting it right." As we chatted, the office began emptying for the day. Only a few determined souls remained, including a tall man in an expensive suit, who I'd seen around but never spoken to. Kevin noticed my glance. "That's Richard Mercer, VP of Business Development," he whispered. "Word is he's being groomed to take over when Davidson retires." I nodded absently, returning to my code. 10 minutes later, a shadow fell across my keyboard. "You must be Natalie Chen," a deep voice said. Looking up, I found myself face to face with Richard Mercer himself. Up close, he was even more imposing. Sharp blue eyes, precisely cut dark hair, and a confidence that filled the room. "Mr. Mercer," I stammered, quickly standing. "Yes, I'm Natalie." "Call me Richard," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Davidson mentioned you're working on the security overhaul. How's it coming?" Surprised the CEO had mentioned me to him, I gave a quick overview of the project. Richard asked several surprisingly technical questions that showed genuine understanding. Our 5-minute conversation stretched to 30 as we discussed potential improvements to the company's security infrastructure. "You know," he said, finally checking his watch, "I haven't eaten since breakfast. Would you like to continue this over dinner? I'd love to hear more about your ideas." That dinner changed everything. Richard was brilliant, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in my perspectives on technology and business. What I expected to be a one-time professional courtesy evolved into regular meetings to discuss company strategy, then casual lunches, and eventually proper dates. Our relationship progressed rapidly. Richard introduced me to Seattle's finer restaurants, took me to symphony performances, and surprised me with weekend trips to nearby islands. I was falling for him, but also growing professionally as he championed my ideas at executive meetings and pushed for my promotion to lead developer. "You have a vision for technology that most of the suits upstairs lack," he told me one night as we walked along the waterfront. "With your technical skills and my business connections, we could really build something special." 6 months later, Richard proposed during a private dinner cruise on Lake Washington, the city lights twinkling behind him as he dropped to one knee. "Natalie, you've changed how I see everything, business, technology, the future. Marry me, and let's build our dreams together." The wedding was small but elegant, attended by close friends and family. My parents, initially wary of our whirlwind romance, were won over by Richard's obvious devotion and the way he spoke about our shared vision. 3 months after our wedding, Richard approached me with a proposal that would change our lives. "I've been thinking about what you said about Nexus wasting your talent," he said, pouring us both a glass of wine in our downtown condo. What if we started our own company, something that truly integrates cutting-edge security with user-friendly interfaces, just like you've been advocating? My heart raced at the possibility. Are you serious? That would take significant startup capital. Richard smiled confidently. I've been saving and making some strategic investments. Plus, I have connections to several angel investors who trust my business sense. With your technical genius and my business acumen, we could create something revolutionary. And so Vertex Sphere was born. Richard secured initial funding while I developed our flagship security software. We started small, just us, and 3 other developers working from a converted warehouse space. The first year was grueling with 18-hour days, takeout dinners at our desks, and falling into bed exhausted only to start again before dawn. But our hard work paid off. Vertex Sphere's security solutions quickly gained a reputation for excellence, earning contracts with several mid-sized tech companies, then a major bank, and finally a government agency. By our second year, we had 28 employees and moved to proper offices in a downtown high-rise. Richard handled business development and investor relations while I led product development and technical operations. We were partners in every sense, finishing each other's sentences in pitch meetings, celebrating wins with private champagne toasts, and working through challenges together late into the night. When things went wrong, we faced them as a united front. When things went right, we shared the credit equally. On our 3rd anniversary, Richard surprised me with papers showing my 45% ownership of the company compared to his 55%. I know it's not exactly equal, he said, kissing my forehead, but the investors insisted the CEO hold majority control. Still, I wanted you to have as much as possible. This company is your brainchild as much as mine. I was touched by the gesture, knowing many founders kept much tighter control. It's perfect, I assured him, not realizing how significant those percentage points would become. As Vertex Sphere continued growing, reaching 100 employees by our 4th year, subtle changes began appearing in our relationship. Richard started attending more business events solo, claiming they were boring networking things I wouldn't enjoy. Board meetings that once featured us presenting together now had Richard taking the lead while I was relegated to technical discussions only. The investors respond better to a single clear voice, he explained when I questioned him. It's just business strategy, nothing personal. I tried to believe him, especially when he remained attentive and loving at home. But as our company approached its 5th anniversary, I couldn't ignore the growing distance. The man who once spent hours discussing every business decision with me now made unilateral choices, informing me after the fact. The final warning sign came when Richard hired Stephanie Williams as our new marketing director, without consulting me. Stephanie was qualified on paper, but something about her overly familiar way with Richard raised my suspicions. When I mentioned my concerns, he dismissed them entirely. Steph is one of the best in the business and we're lucky to have her, he said firmly. And if you must know, yes, we dated briefly in college, but that was over 15 years ago. I'd appreciate if you'd make her feel welcome rather than creating problems. That evening marked the first significant crack in our marriage and business partnership, but I had no idea just how quickly everything we'd built together was about to unravel. The change in Richard accelerated after Stephanie joined Vertex Sphere. Suddenly, my husband was working late, more often attending weekend strategy sessions that I wasn't invited to, and returning home with a lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume. I tried convincing myself it was just business stress. We had recently crossed the 200-employee mark and were negotiating our largest contract yet, with a Fortune 500 company, I focused on my work leading the development team through the final phases of our new encryption software. The atmosphere in the office subtly shifted too. Where once I had been greeted with the same respect as Richard, I now noticed certain executives, particularly those Richard had recently hired, would seek his approval even on technical matters that fell squarely in my domain. One Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual to prepare for a client presentation. Passing by the executive conference room, I heard Richard's distinctive laugh, followed by a feminine giggle. The door was slightly ajar, and I glimpsed Richard with his arm casually draped around Stephanie's shoulders as they reviewed something on her tablet. "This is perfect," he was saying. "The board will love your approach." "I still think we should run it by Natalie," Stephanie replied, though her tone suggested reluctance rather than genuine concern. "Technically, she's still Chief Technology Officer." Richard's response chilled me. "Let me worry about Natalie. She's brilliant with code but doesn't understand the bigger business picture. Besides, this restructuring plan needs to remain confidential until we're ready to implement it." Restructuring. This was the first I'd heard of any reorganization plan. I quietly backed away, mind racing. Rather than confront Richard immediately, I decided to investigate further. That night, when he claimed to be working late, I checked his calendar through our shared office system and found a dinner reservation at Canlis, Seattle's most romantic restaurant under his name. Fighting against my rising suspicions, I drove to the restaurant and discreetly confirmed my fears. Through the window, I saw Richard and Stephanie intimate in a corner booth, his hand covering hers on the table, their faces close together in conversation that was clearly not about marketing strategies. The betrayal cut deep, but I refused to fall apart. Instead, I channeled my pain into action. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Donnelly, the company's legal counsel and someone I trusted to be discreet. Hypothetically speaking, I asked after ensuring her office door was closed, what would happen if two married co-founders divorced? How would company ownership be affected? Patricia's eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. Hypothetically, it would depend on several factors: the specific ownership structure, whether there's a prenuptial agreement, and which state laws apply. And if one co-founder could prove the other was misusing company resources or planning unauthorized restructuring, I pressed. Patricia sighed, removing her glasses. "Natalie, before I answer more hypothetical questions, I should remind you that as company counsel, my primary obligation is to Vertex Sphere, not to either you or Richard individually. If you're considering legal action involving the company, you should consult a private attorney." I nodded, understanding her position. "Just one more question. Who has access to view or change the company's ownership records and operating agreement? Those documents are maintained by our corporate secretary and require board approval for any modifications," she explained, then added cautiously, "the board that Richard appointed and chairs." The implication was clear. If it came to a legal battle, Richard had positioned himself with significant advantages. I thanked Patricia and left already formulating my next steps. Over the following week, I gathered evidence discreetly. I discovered Richard had been systematically marginalizing my role in executive communications, removing me from key email chains and meetings. The restructuring plan Stephanie was developing would effectively demote me to a technical advisor position while elevating several of Richard's recent hires. Most concerningly, I found evidence that Richard was preparing to launch a new subsidiary that would handle our most profitable government contracts, a subsidiary where I appeared to have no ownership stake at all. I consulted privately with a respected business attorney who specialized in startup disputes. After reviewing my evidence, Jennifer Blackwell didn't mince words. "Based on what you've shown me, your husband appears to be orchestrating a corporate squeeze-out. If you wait until he implements these plans, you'll be fighting an uphill battle to maintain your position and ownership. What are my options?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. You have leverage now that you might not have later, Jennifer advised. Your technical knowledge is still critical to the company's operations. You're a public face of the brand, and you have documented evidence of potential breaches of fiduciary duty. The question is, what do you want the outcome to be? I considered this carefully. Despite everything, I loved the company we'd built. Our work protected millions of people's digital lives. The team we'd assembled was brilliant and dedicated. I want to save the company, I decided, even if my marriage can't be saved. Jennifer nodded. Then we need to move carefully but decisively. I suggest a two-track approach. Prepare legally for the worst-case scenario while giving Richard one chance to correct course. Following her advice, I spent another week documenting everything, backing up crucial company data I had legitimate access to, and securing copies of all founding documents and communications about my role. I also reached out to several board members I believed might be sympathetic, arranging casual coffees to gauge their understanding of the situation without showing my full hand. Finally, I felt prepared to confront Richard directly. I chose a Friday evening when he claimed to be working late, knowing he was actually meeting Stephanie at a hotel bar across town. I waited in our home, rehearsing what I would say when he returned, but Richard never came home that night. At 10 p.m., I received a text, breakthrough with the Axiom contract, pulling an all-nighter at the office with the team. Don't wait up. The casual lie was the final straw. This man, who had once been my partner in every sense, had become someone I no longer recognized. Someone who could lie to my face while dismantling everything we'd built together. That night, I made the decision that would lead to the most shocking day of my professional life. The confrontation I had planned would happen, but not in the private setting of our home. If Richard wanted to play power games, he would learn. I was not the pushover he apparently thought I had become. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's typical drizzle matching my stormy mood. I dressed with particular care. A charcoal power suit, subtle makeup, hair in a sleek chignon. This would be the most important business meeting of my life, though. Only I knew it was happening. Richard had called an all-hands company meeting for 10 a.m. in our largest conference space. The official agenda mentioned strategic announcements and organizational updates. Based on the documents I'd discovered, I knew he was planning to unveil the first phase of his restructuring plan, one that would significantly diminish my authority while elevating Stephanie to an executive vice president role. I arrived early, positioning myself at the back of the room rather than in my usual place beside Richard at the front. Employees filtered in, many nodding respectfully in my direction, others looking confused by my unusual position. At precisely 10 a.m., Richard strode in with Stephanie close behind, both wearing matching expressions of confident anticipation. "Good morning, Vertex Sphere," Richard began with his trademark charismatic energy. "Today marks an exciting new chapter in our company's growth." For the next 15 minutes, I listened as my husband outlined his vision for the company's future, a vision that barely mentioned me or the technological foundation that had made our success possible. Instead, he emphasized new marketing initiatives, strategic partnerships, and organizational streamlining that would optimize decision-making channels. Throughout his presentation, Richard barely glanced in my direction. The few times our eyes met, he seemed momentarily disconcerted by my calm demeanor before continuing smoothly. As he approached the portion of his presentation that would announce the effective demotion of several original team members, including me, I knew my moment had arrived. "And now for some specific organizational changes that will help us achieve these ambitious goals," Richard said, clicking to a slide showing a new organizational chart. "First, excuse me, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the room as I stepped forward. "Before you continue, there's a matter I need to address." The room fell silent. Richard's expression flashed from surprise to irritation to forced affability in seconds. "Natalie, we can discuss any concerns after the meeting," he said with a tight smile. "Let's stick to the agenda for now." Actually, this is directly relevant to the organizational changes you're about to announce, I replied, maintaining my professional tone as I continued walking toward the front of the room. Specifically, it concerns the unauthorized redirection of company resources and potential breaches of fiduciary duty that I've documented over the past month. A murmur ran through the assembled employees. Richard's face darkened as he stepped away from the podium to meet me halfway. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. "Protecting the company we built," I answered quietly, then raising my voice to address the room again. "As co-founder and chief technology officer of Vertex Sphere, I've become aware of concerning patterns that threaten our company culture and technical integrity." "That's enough!" Richard snapped, grabbing my arm just above the elbow, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to assert control. The gesture wasn't lost on the watching employees, many of whom looked uncomfortable. Stephanie hurried forward, her professional mask slipping to reveal naked panic. "Perhaps we should take a 10-minute break," she suggested loudly. "Excellent idea," Richard agreed, his fingers still gripping my arm. "Everyone take 10. Get some coffee, stretch your legs." As the room reluctantly began to empty, Richard pulled me toward a corner, his voice a furious whisper. "Have you lost your mind? What kind of stunt are you trying to pull?" "No stunt, Richard. Just truth," I replied calmly. "I know about the restructuring plan that cuts me out. I know about the new subsidiary that conveniently doesn't include my ownership. And I know about you and Stephanie." His face paled slightly before flushing with anger. "You're making wild accusations based on misunderstood fragments of information. This is completely unprofessional." "Unprofessional?" I repeated, incredulous. "Like sleeping with the marketing director you hired without consulting me, like planning to demote your co-founder without discussion, that kind of unprofessional." Stephanie hovered nearby, clearly torn between fleeing the uncomfortable scene and staying to protect her interests. Richard noticed several employees lingering just outside the glass walls, watching our confrontation with undisguised interest. His jaw tightened as he made a swift calculation. "This stops now. You're clearly emotionally compromised and making unfounded accusations that could damage the company." "They're not unfounded and you know it," I countered. Richard straightened, adjusting his tie as he visibly shifted to CEO mode. "Natalie, effective immediately, you're suspended from all company duties until further notice." "You can't suspend me. I'm a co-founder and owner. Actually, as CEO and majority shareholder, I can," he stated coldly. "You'll retain your title and compensation for now, but you're relieved of all responsibilities pending a review of your recent behavior." I stood my ground. "On what grounds exactly?" Richard's eyes narrowed as he calculated his next move. By now, employees were openly watching through the glass, and I could see Patricia from legal looking particularly concerned. "Let's bring everyone back in," Richard decided abruptly. "I'll handle this properly." As employees filtered back into the conference room, tension hung heavy in the air. Richard resumed his position at the podium, the picture of controlled leadership, despite the flush still visible on his neck. "I apologize for the interruption," he began smoothly. "Unfortunately, we need to address an unexpected situation before continuing with our planned announcements." He turned to face me directly, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent room. "Natalie, it's become apparent that there are serious concerns about your recent conduct, specifically your refusal to work collaboratively with key team members and your disrespectful treatment of Ms. Williams." Murmurs rippled through the room. I remained expressionless, though inwardly I marveled at his audacity. "Therefore," Richard continued, his voice hardening, "you're suspended until you issue a formal apology to Stephanie and demonstrate willingness to support the company's strategic direction. You'll retain your title and compensation during this period, but you're barred from company premises and systems effective immediately." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Stephanie had the grace to look uncomfortable, studying her shoes intently. "You're suspending me for not apologizing to your girlfriend?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly through the murmurs. Richard's face contorted briefly before he regained control. This has nothing to do with personal relationships and everything to do with professional conduct. Your insubordination and unfounded accusations are damaging to company morale. Laughter rippled from somewhere in the back of the room. Everyone knew Richard and I were married co-founders. The suggestion that I could be insubordinate to him struck some as absurd. Richard's face darkened further. "You're suspended until further notice," he repeated firmly. "Please collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. Your system access will be revoked within the hour." Heat burned in my cheeks, but I refused to show how deeply his public humiliation cut. Instead, I nodded once, my voice steady as I addressed the room rather than just Richard. "All right. I understand." Then I turned and walked calmly from the room, head high, despite feeling hundreds of eyes on my back. As the door closed behind me, I heard Richard quickly shifting attention back to his planned announcements, his voice artificially bright as he tried to salvage the meeting. In my office, I collected the few personal items I needed. Family photos, a spare phone charger, my favourite coffee mug. Everything else I left untouched. I had already secured the important documents and backup data I might need. As I prepared to leave, Patricia from legal appeared in my doorway, her expression grave. "Natalie, do you have a moment?" she asked quietly, closing the door behind her. "I believe I've been ordered off the premises," I replied with a wry smile. Patricia shook her head slightly. "What I just witnessed concerns me greatly. As company counsel, I have obligations to the corporation itself, not just to the CEO. I appreciate your position," I said carefully. She lowered her voice further. "I can't advise you directly, since that would be a conflict of interest. But I strongly suggest you consult with qualified legal counsel immediately. What happened today raises serious governance questions." I nodded, appreciating her professional integrity. "Thank you, Patricia. I understand." As I walked through the office toward the exit, I felt the weight of stares and whispers. Some employees looked away awkwardly, others offered sympathetic glances, and a few of my original team members appeared openly distressed. Kevin, my old cubicle neighbour, who had become our lead security architect, stepped into my path. "This is wrong," he said simply. "Everyone knows it." "Thank you," I replied, touching his arm briefly. "Just keep doing the excellent work you always do." At the main exit, I turned for one last look at the company we had built from nothing. 5 years of dreams, sweat, and sacrifice embodied in these walls. I allowed myself exactly 10 seconds of emotion before squaring my shoulders and walking out the door. In my car, I sent 2 text messages. The first to Jennifer Blackwell, my attorney. "It happened. Proceed with Plan A." The second was to Richard. "I'll be at the condo tonight to collect my things. I suggest you stay elsewhere." Then I drove directly to the bank where I had recently opened a new account. In my name, only one Richard couldn't access. There I made a very specific transaction that would set in motion everything Jennifer and I had prepared for precisely this scenario. By that evening, wheels were turning that would change Vertex Sphere forever. Richard had no idea what was coming, but by this time tomorrow, the company would never be the same. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear, a rare, perfect Seattle day that felt like the universe's endorsement of what I was about to do. I had spent the night in a hotel after collecting essential items from our condo clothes documents and sentimental possessions I couldn't bear to lose in what was certain to be an ugly divorce. Richard had indeed stayed away as I'd suggested, though he'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "We need to talk like adults. This tantrum isn't helping either of us. Call me when you're ready to discuss things rationally." His condescension only strengthened my resolve. The man who had once been my partner now viewed my reaction to his betrayal as a childish tantrum. The Richard I had fallen in love with, who had valued my mind and treated me as an equal, was gone if he had ever truly existed. I dressed meticulously in a navy suit I knew projected confidence and competence. My hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, my makeup minimal but precise. Today wasn't about emotion, it was about executing a carefully constructed plan with surgical precision. At precisely 7:30 a.m. I entered an upscale downtown coffee shop where Jennifer Blackwell waited with a distinguished older man I recognized as Harold Reynolds, one of Seattle's most respected corporate attorneys. Jennifer had brought him in as special counsel for this critical phase. "Everything is in place," Jennifer confirmed after introductions. The documents were filed with the State Business Registry when it opened at 7 a.m. and the notifications to board members were sent simultaneously. The financial transactions cleared overnight. "What about the restraining order?" I asked. "Judge Sanders signed it first thing this morning based on the evidence of fiduciary breaches," Harold replied. "It's temporary, just 7 days, but that gives us the window we need." "And the employees?" IT Director Marcus Chen confirmed he received your instructions and has implemented the system changes as requested, Jennifer said. "The security team has been briefed that they're conducting a routine penetration test of the system that requires temporary protocol adjustments." I nodded, reviewing the timeline once more. "Richard typically arrives around 8:30. He'll check his messages, deal with immediate issues, and probably call a meeting to determine how to proceed against me. That gives us approximately 1 hour before he realizes what's happening." "Your former assistant Lauren confirmed she's still willing to text you when he arrives?" Harold asked. "Yes, she's been increasingly concerned about his behavior and agreed to help. She'll also let us know when legal arrives at his office." At 8:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Eagle has landed. Looks smug." I allowed myself a small smile. "He's there. Let's give him 15 minutes to settle in before we proceed with the next phase." Harold made a brief call to his team waiting near Vertex Sphere's building. At 8:30, precisely 3 legal couriers would simultaneously deliver documents to Richard, the head of HR and the reception desk for general distribution. At 8:32, Lauren texted again. "Papers delivered. His face is priceless. Legal summoned." "Perfect," Jennifer said, checking her watch. "The company-wide email should be hitting inboxes right about now." I pictured the scene unfolding at Vertex Sphere, employees arriving to find an official notice in their inboxes stating that pursuant to an emergency shareholder action and temporary court order, significant changes to corporate governance were being implemented immediately, pending an emergency board meeting that afternoon. At 8:45, Lauren's most critical message arrived. "He's trying to access the system. It's happening." Now, I could visualize Richard increasingly panicked, attempting to assess the situation by logging into our company systems, only to find his access restricted to basic functions, unable to transfer funds, change permissions, or access certain confidential documents. The very systems I had designed were now protecting the company from him. "It's time," I said, standing. "Let's go." The 3 of us rode in Harold's town car to Vertex Sphere's building. In the lobby, we were met by 2 uniformed security officers who had been contracted through Harold's firm, a necessary precaution given Richard's unpredictable temper. "Remember," Jennifer cautioned as we rode the elevator, "no matter what he says or does, maintain your professional demeanor. The temporary restraining order gives us legal authority, but appearances matter for what comes next." I nodded, centering myself with a deep breath as the elevator doors opened on our executive floor. The scene that greeted us was exactly as I had anticipated: controlled chaos. Employees stood in clusters, whispering urgently. Several looked up as I entered, expressions ranging from shock to relief to confusion. Lauren hurried over, her voice low. "He's in his office with Patricia and 2 other attorneys from legal. They've been in there for 15 minutes and I could hear shouting. "Thank you for everything," I told her sincerely. "You should return to your desk now. Document everything you hear or see." As we approached Richard's office, the glass walls revealed exactly the tableau I had expected: Richard pacing furiously while Patricia appeared to be trying to calm him down. Two junior attorneys from our legal team looked distinctly uncomfortable, one rapidly typing on his laptop while the other spoke urgently into a phone. I knocked once on the doorframe before entering Jennifer and Harold, flanking me like sentinels. Richard froze mid-pace, his expression transforming from rage to disbelief to a dangerous calm in seconds. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Protecting the company," I replied simply, "as I am legally entitled and obligated to do as co-founder and significant shareholder." Patricia stood looking genuinely relieved to see professional legal representation entering the situation. "Mr. Mercer, as I was explaining, the documents appear to be in order. The temporary restraining order has been properly issued by the court. This is corporate theft," Richard exploded, slamming his hand on the desk. "She's trying to steal the company from under me." Harold stepped forward, his dignified presence immediately commanding attention. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Harold Reynolds, special counsel to Mrs. Mercer. Nothing illegal has occurred here. What has happened is the lawful exercise of shareholder rights in response to documented breaches of fiduciary duty." "What breaches? This is absurd," Richard sputtered. Jennifer placed a folder on his desk. "Evidence of unauthorized fund transfers to the shell company Axiom Ventures, which our investigation reveals is solely owned by you. Documentation of undisclosed conflicts of interest in hiring decisions. Evidence of plans to dilute Mrs. Mercer's ownership through unauthorized restructuring. And perhaps most significantly," Harold continued calmly, "evidence that you attempted to transfer intellectual property developed by Mrs. Mercer to this new entity without board approval or appropriate compensation to Vertex Sphere." Richard's face had grown increasingly pale. His eyes darted to Patricia, who was reviewing the documents with a deepening frown. "These allegations appear substantiated," she said carefully. "Particularly concerning is this transfer of patent applications for technologies clearly developed under Vertex Sphere's umbrella." "This is all a misunderstanding," Richard insisted, his charm surfacing as he recognized the seriousness of the situation. "Business structures are complex. Natalie has misinterpreted normal corporate development activities." "The court disagrees," Harold replied. "Hence the temporary restraining order preventing you from making any further financial decisions, accessing certain company systems, or taking retaliatory action against Mrs. Mercer or any employees." Richard turned to me, his voice dropping to an intimate tone despite our audience. "Natalie, this isn't you. We built this company together. Whatever issues we have personally, we can work through them without destroying everything we've created." For a moment, I felt a pang of our old connection. The memory of late nights developing code while he brought me coffee, our shared exhilaration when we landed our first major client. But then I remembered his cold voice, suspending me the laughter of employees, witnessing my humiliation, his dismissal of my concerns as a tantrum. "You're right about one thing, Richard," I said quietly. "We did build this together. That's why I couldn't stand by and watch you dismantle it for personal gain." Before he could respond, a soft knock came at the door. Stephanie stood there, looking uncharacteristically dishevelled. "Richard, what's happening? My system access is restricted, and there's an email about governance changes." Her voice trailed off as she registered my presence and the tense atmosphere in the room. Richard's expression hardened. "Natalie has decided to launch a corporate coup," he said bitterly. "Apparently, my wife finds it easier to steal the company than discuss our marital issues like an adult." Jennifer stepped forward smoothly. "Ms. Williams, as Vertex Sphere's marketing director, you should be aware that an emergency board meeting has been called for 2 p.m. today to address governance concerns. Until then, certain system restrictions are in place as a standard precaution." Stephanie's eyes widened as she looked between Richard and me. "This is insane. You can't just—" "Ms. Williams," Harold interrupted gently but firmly, Given the documented evidence of your personal relationship with Mr. Mercer and your involvement in certain questionable decisions, I would strongly advise you to consult with independent counsel before making any statements that might affect your own legal position. Her mouth snapped shut as the implication registered. With one last, desperate look at Richard, she retreated from the doorway. Richard turned to me, all pretense of reasonableness gone. "You won't get away with this. The board will never support you over me." "Actually," I replied calmly, 3 board members have already expressed their support after reviewing the evidence. You appointed them for their business acumen. They understand the legal and financial risks your actions have created for the company. "And what exactly do you think happens now?" he demanded. "You expect to run this company without me?" "The board will decide the company's leadership structure this afternoon," Jennifer interjected. "For now, the temporary order simply preserves the status quo and prevents further potentially damaging actions." Harold checked his watch. "It's now 9:15. Per the court order, Mr. Mercer, you have until 10 a.m. to collect personal belongings before you must leave the premises until the board meeting at 2 p.m. Richard stared at me, a complex mixture of rage, disbelief, and something that might have been reluctant respect crossing his features. "You planned this meticulously." "I learned from the best," I acknowledged quietly. As security escorted Richard to collect his things from his office, I turned to Patricia. "I know this puts you in an awkward position. I want to assure you that my only goal is protecting the company." She nodded slowly. "The evidence is concerning. As corporate counsel, my duty is to Vertex Sphere itself, not to either of you personally. I'll need to present a complete legal assessment at the board meeting." "Of course," I agreed. "Complete transparency is exactly what's needed now." As word spread throughout the office, I made a point of walking the floors, speaking calmly with team leads, and addressing concerns. By the time Richard departed, glaring at me one last time as the elevator doors closed, I had begun the process of stabilizing a shocked organization. The emergency board meeting that afternoon was tense but decisive. With Patricia presenting the legal issues, our CFO outlining the financial irregularities, and 3 of Richard's own appointees expressing grave concerns about his actions, the outcome was inevitable. The board voted unanimously to remove Richard as CEO pending a full investigation and to appoint me as interim CEO with a special committee providing oversight. As I left the boardroom exhausted but vindicated, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." I didn't bother responding. Actions had spoken loudly enough today, and there would be time for words later. For now, I had a company to lead, and employees who needed reassurance that despite the dramatic events, Vertex Sphere's mission and their jobs remained secure. The day that had begun with Richard's sneering, "Finally learned your place," had indeed shown me exactly where I belonged at the helm of the company I had helped create, steering it back to the principles of innovation and integrity that had been our foundation from the beginning. The 48 hours following Richard's removal were a whirlwind. I moved between emergency leadership meetings, employee town halls, and one-on-one conversations with key team members who needed reassurance. Sleep became a luxury as I worked to stabilize the company while lawyers documented the full extent of Richard's financial manipulations. By Thursday morning, the initial shock had begun to settle into a new reality. I arrived at the office early, settling into what had been Richard's corner office, now hastily redecorated to remove his personal touches. Lauren had placed fresh flowers on the credenza and hung one of my favourite Seattle landscape photographs, where Richard's sailing trophies had once stood. "The executive team is assembled in the conference room," she informed me, and Marcus from IT said the system transition is complete. All organisational changes have been reversed to pre-suspension status. I nodded gratefully. "Thank you for everything." "He underestimated you," Lauren said with a small smile. "We all did, I think." The comment stung slightly, though I knew she meant it as a compliment. Had I been that invisible that easily dismissed despite my title and contributions? It was a sobering thought as I made my way to the conference room. The meeting was productive, but revealed the challenges ahead. Our CFO, Michael, presented a thorough analysis of the financial maneuvers Richard had attempted. While we had caught the most egregious transfers before they could be completed, some damage control was still necessary. The good news, Michael concluded, is that the core business remains strong. Customer contracts are secure and our cash position is healthy. The attempted transfer of intellectual property to Axiom Ventures was stopped before completion. What about client relationships? I asked. Richard was the face of the company to many of our largest accounts. Lisa from Client Services nodded. We've already reached out to our top 20 clients with a brief professional explanation of the leadership change. So far, the response has been neutral to positive. 3 have requested meetings with you personally. Schedule those immediately, I directed. Stability and continuity need to be our message. Marcus from IT provided an update on security measures. We've implemented enhanced monitoring and changed all critical access credentials. Richard's personal devices have been remotely wiped of company data as permitted by our security policy. The conversation then turned to Stephanie and 3 other executives Richard had hired, who were closely aligned with his unauthorized plans. Human Resources has placed them on administrative leave pending investigation, our HR director explained. Initial interviews suggest they were following Richard's direction, though Ms. Williams appears to have been more actively involved in planning. I considered this carefully. We'll handle each case individually based on the evidence. I want to be fair, but also clear that ethical violations won't be tolerated. After the meeting adjourned, Jennifer pulled me aside. We need to discuss the divorce proceedings. Harold has coordinated with a top family law attorney who can work alongside our corporate team. I haven't even had time to process that part, I admitted. Everything's happened so fast. That's understandable, but Richard won't wait. Our sources indicate he's already consulting with divorce attorneys known for aggressive tactics. I sighed, feeling the weight of both professional and personal battles ahead. Set up the meeting, but right now, the company has to be my priority. By Friday, news of the dramatic leadership change at Vertex Sphere had leaked to the tech press. My phone rang constantly, with reporters seeking comments and industry blogs speculated wildly about what had happened. Jennifer's team crafted a simple statement acknowledging a leadership transition following governance concerns and emphasizing the company's continued commitment to its products and customers. Late Friday afternoon, as I reviewed preliminary findings from the financial audit, my private line rang. The number was unfamiliar. Natalie Mercer, I answered. Ms. Mercer, this is Detective Collins with Seattle PD White Collar Division. We've received some concerning information regarding Vertex Sphere that I'd like to discuss with you. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of information? An anonymous tip alleging financial irregularities and possible embezzlement by company leadership. Given your company's profile, we take such allegations seriously. Richard, it had to be. Unable to win through legitimate corporate channels, he was escalating to criminal allegations. Detective Collins' Vertex Sphere has recently undergone a leadership change following discovery of potential financial improprieties by our former CEO. We're conducting a thorough internal investigation and would be happy to cooperate fully with any police inquiry. The detective seemed momentarily thrown by my forthrightness. I see. In that case, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and your legal team to review these matters. Of course. Our corporate counsel will contact you today to arrange it. After hanging up, I immediately called Jennifer to brief her on this new development. She was concerned, but not alarmed. It's a typical scorched earth tactic, she explained. He's hoping to create enough legal chaos to force a settlement on his terms. The good news is we've documented everything meticulously. If anything, a police investigation might uncover additional evidence against him. That evening, exhausted beyond measure, I finally returned to my hotel room. 3 days of constant crisis management had left me running on adrenaline and coffee. As I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the bed, my phone buzzed with a text. We need to talk. Neutral ground. The park bench by the waterfront where we used to have lunch. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Richard. After days of working through lawyers and proxies, he wanted a face-to-face meeting. My first instinct was to refuse to maintain the professional distance our lawyers had established. But a small part of me, perhaps the part that still remembered the man I had fallen in love with, wanted closure. After consulting with Jennifer, who advised against meeting but acknowledged it was my personal decision, I replied simply, "I'll be there. 15 minutes only." Saturday morning brought unseasonably warm sunshine. I arrived at the waterfront park 10 minutes early, choosing a bench with clear sightlines and plenty of people around, a precaution Jennifer had insisted upon. Richard approached precisely at 10 a.m. looking both familiar and strange. He wore casual clothes rather than his usual impeccable suit, and stubble shadowed his jaw. For a moment, he resembled the Richard from our early days, before success had polished him into something harder and more remote. "Natalie," he acknowledged, sitting at the opposite end of the bench. "Richard." We sat in silence for a moment, watching ferries cross the Sound against the backdrop of distant mountains. "You've made quite a splash," he finally said. "The tech blogs are having a field day with speculation." "That wasn't my intention." He laughed shortly. "Your intention was clearly to take the company from me. You succeeded spectacularly." "My intention was to protect what we built together," I corrected. "You were the one dismantling it piece by piece, transferring assets, planning to dilute my ownership, creating shadow entities." "Business restructuring," he countered. "Standard corporate strategy." "Is that what you call sleeping with the marketing director and planning to push me out of my own company? Corporate strategy?" His jaw tightened. "I made some personal mistakes. I acknowledge that. But your response was nuclear. You could have come to me privately." The audacity nearly took my breath away. "I tried. For months, I tried talking to you about the changes I was seeing. You dismissed every concern. Then you publicly humiliated and suspended me." "I lost my temper," he admitted. "It was unprofessional." "It was revealing," I replied. "It showed exactly what you thought of me and my role in our company." Richard stared out at the water. "So what happens now? You run the company, I'm the villain in our story, and we fight it out through lawyers for the next year." "That depends on you. The board has authorized me to propose a settlement. Clean break, no protracted legal battle, no criminal charges for the financial transfers." "What's the catch?" he asked suspiciously. "You sign over your remaining shares in Vertex Sphere. You receive fair market value for them, minus restitution for the funds you diverted. You sign comprehensive non-disparagement and non-compete agreements. In return, the company doesn't pursue further legal action regarding the financial improprieties." His laugh held no humor. "You want me to just walk away from everything I built?" "Everything we built," I corrected quietly. "And yes, because the alternative is years of ugly litigation, potential criminal charges, and watching the company suffer through public battle." "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" There was a note of reluctant admiration in his voice. "I learned to be thorough from working with you," I acknowledged. "It used to be one of the things I admired most about you." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of our shattered marriage and business partnership hanging between us. "I'll consider the offer," he finally said, standing. "My lawyers will contact yours." As he turned to leave, I called after him, "Richard, one question." He paused, looking back with an unreadable expression. "Was any of it real us, I mean? Or was I just useful to you?" Something flashed across his features, regret perhaps, or simply discomfort at the directness of the question. "It was real," he said after a long moment, "until success changed me into someone who couldn't see what was right in front of him anymore." With that, he walked away, shoulders straight, despite everything. I watched until he disappeared around the curve of the waterfront path, a strange hollowness in my chest, despite my professional victory. 3 days later, Richard's lawyers contacted Jennifer with a counter-proposal that was surprisingly reasonable. After another week of negotiations, we reached a settlement that allowed both of us to move forward. Richard would depart with a fair financial package, but no ongoing connection to Vertex Sphere. The divorce proceedings would be handled separately, but with an agreement to keep them private and dignified. On Monday morning, 2 weeks after the dramatic confrontation that had changed everything, I stood before the assembled company as its official CEO, no longer interim. The board had voted unanimously to confirm my position after reviewing the comprehensive recovery plan I had presented. Vertex Sphere was founded on principles of innovation, integrity, and impact. I told the employees gathered in our largest conference space. Recent events tested those principles, but they remain our North Star. As we move forward, I make you 3 promises. First, transparency in all our operations. Second, recognition for the contributions each of you makes to our success. And third, unwavering commitment to the products that protect our clients' most valuable digital assets. The applause that followed felt like both an ending and a beginning. As employees returned to their workstations, I noticed Kevin, my old cubicle neighbor from Nexus Technologies, waiting nearby. Quite a journey from debugging security patches to running the company, he observed with a smile. Sometimes the path takes unexpected turns, I agreed. For what it's worth, he said, the team is behind you, 100%. What you built deserves to be protected. His words stayed with me as I walked to my office, no longer Richard's space with my additions, but truly mine now. On the desk sat a small potted plant with a card from the original development team. Growth comes after the storm. We're with you. The company Richard and I had built together would continue growing, though differently than either of us had imagined. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but as I looked out over the Seattle skyline from my office window, I felt ready for whatever challenges came next, standing firmly in the place I had earned, no longer in anyone's shadow. 6 months passed in a blur of 18-hour days, strategic decisions, and careful rebuilding of Vertex Sphere's internal culture. The company not only survived the leadership crisis, but began to thrive under more transparent management and renewed focus on our core security products. The divorce was finalized with surprising efficiency thanks to the comprehensive settlement agreement. Richard had ultimately chosen a clean break over protracted battle, accepting the financial terms in exchange for freedom from ongoing legal entanglements. Through our lawyers, I heard he had moved to Boston to work with a venture capital firm about as far from Seattle and Vertex Sphere as he could get while remaining in tech. Stephanie had resigned during her administrative leave along with 2 other executives closely aligned with Richard. The remaining leadership team had coalesced around a renewed vision for the company, with several long-time employees stepping into expanded roles. On a crisp fall morning, I arrived at the office early to prepare for an important announcement. Vertex Sphere had just closed its largest contract to date, a cybersecurity partnership with a consortium of financial institutions that would double our annual revenue. The achievement belonged to the entire company, but especially to the original technical team that had remained loyal through the turmoil. Lauren met me at the elevator with a coffee and tablet displaying the day's schedule. The all-hands meeting is set for 10 a.m. Financial Times wants an exclusive interview after the announcement, and the board chair called to congratulate you personally. Thank you, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Any word from legal on the patent approvals? Just came through this morning, she confirmed with a smile. All 7 applications approved. Kevin is ecstatic. This was the icing on the cake. Patents for the security protocols I had developed now officially recognized and protected. The intellectual property Richard had attempted to divert was securely under Vertex Sphere ownership, creating a moat around our core technology that competitors couldn't easily cross. As I settled into my office, I took a moment to reflect on how much had changed. My desk now held photos of my new apartment overlooking Lake Union, a weekend hiking trip with friends from the development team, and my parents' recent visit from California. No pictures of Richard remained. That chapter was closed. The office itself had been remodeled, replacing the dark wood and masculine aesthetics Richard had preferred with a lighter, more collaborative space. Glass walls had replaced some interior barriers symbolic of the transparency I had promised employees during those first difficult days. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Kevin entered, his usual calm demeanor brightened by excitement. "We did it," he said, simply placing a document folder on my desk. "Patent certificates officially recorded. The team's already planning a celebration for Friday." "This belongs to all of you," I told him sincerely. "Your contributions made these innovations possible." He shook his head slightly. "You implemented your vision, Natalie. Everyone knows that core architecture came from your brain. You were always the technical genius behind this company." His words warmed me, not just for the recognition of my work, but for the validation of what I had known all along, that my contributions had been fundamental to Vertex Sphere's success, despite Richard's attempts to minimize them. "Have you seen the latest industry rankings?" Kevin asked, pulling up an article on his tablet. "Vertex Sphere just cracked the top 10 security firms nationally." The article specifically mentions the technical leadership and innovative approach that distinguishes us from competitors. I skimmed the piece, noting with satisfaction that it highlighted our technological advantages rather than corporate drama. We had successfully shifted the narrative from leadership crisis to innovation powerhouse. The morning flew by in preparation for the announcement. At 10 a.m. sharp, I stood before the assembled company, now grown to over 300 employees, to share our latest achievement. 6 months ago, we faced an unprecedented challenge. I began acknowledging our journey. Today, we celebrate an unprecedented success. The financial consortium contract represents not just revenue growth, but validation of our technical approach and company values. As I outlined the details of the new partnership and recognized team members who had made it possible, I noticed many of the original employees exchanging proud glances. They had weathered the storm alongside me, believing in the company's mission despite leadership upheaval. "This achievement belongs to everyone in this room," I concluded. "Each of you who stayed committed to our vision, who put in extra hours during uncertain times, who believed in what we're building here. Vertex Sphere isn't defined by any single person. It's defined by our collective commitment to protecting digital security and privacy." The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. As employees mingled after the formal announcement, sharing congratulations and relief at our continued success, I circulated through the room, connecting personally with as many team members as possible, something Richard had rarely done, preferring to remain somewhat remote and presidential. Later that afternoon, I met with our expanded executive team to begin planning for the growth this new contract would enable. The dynamics were noticeably different from the meetings Richard had led, more collaborative, with diverse perspectives, actively sought rather than merely tolerated. "We'll need to expand the development team significantly," Marcus from IT noted, "at least 20 new engineers over the next quarter. And we should consider opening the East Coast office earlier than planned," Lisa from Client Services added. "Having a presence near the consortium headquarters would strengthen the relationship." The discussion flowed freely, each leader contributing expertise, without the fear of dismissal or ridicule that had sometimes characterized Richard's management style. When disagreements arose, they were addressed openly rather than through political maneuvering. As the meeting concluded, Michael, our CFO, who had been with the company since the early days, lingered behind. "I've been meaning to tell you something." he said, closing the conference room door for privacy. Last week, I had dinner with Barton Capital's managing director. They were early investors in Vertex Sphere. Is everything all right? I asked, concerned about potential investor issues. Michael smiled. More than all right. James Barton specifically mentioned how impressed they've been with the company's performance under your leadership. Their analytics predicted a 30% valuation drop after the leadership crisis. Instead, we've seen a 15% increase. That's encouraging, I acknowledged. It's more than that, Michael continued. James mentioned that Richard approached them about backing a new venture. They declined. I absorbed this information silently. Richard attempting to launch a competing business wasn't surprising, but major investors choosing loyalty to Vertex Sphere over him represented a significant vote of confidence in our new direction. They believe in what we're building here, Michael concluded, in what you're building. That evening, I worked late, finalizing details for the implementation of the consortium contract. The office had emptied hours earlier, leaving me alone with the spectacular nighttime view of Seattle's skyline. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's name made me pause. Richard Mercer. For a moment, I considered ignoring it until morning when I would have the emotional bandwidth to deal with whatever he wanted. But curiosity won out and I opened the message. Natalie, congratulations on the consortium contract. Industry news travels fast, and your team deserves credit for an impressive achievement. I'm writing not to intrude on your success, but to offer something that's been on my mind. During the settlement, my lawyers advised against any communication that might be construed as admission of wrongdoing. Now that legal matters are concluded, I can say what should have been said months ago. I'm sorry. Not just for the specific actions that led to our corporate separation, but for the gradual erosion of the partnership that made Vertex Sphere special from the beginning. Somewhere along the way, I began believing my own mythology as the business genius behind our success, forgetting that your technical vision was always the company's true foundation. This isn't an attempt to reinsert myself into your life or the company. I've accepted that chapter is closed. It's simply an acknowledgement of truth that's taken me 6 months of reflection to fully recognize. You've built something remarkable and it appears to be thriving under your leadership in ways it might never have under mine. Richard. I read the email twice, unexpected emotions surfacing. Not regret or longing, but a complex mixture of vindication and closure. Richard's acknowledgement of my central role in building Vertex Sphere represented something I had sought for years during our partnership, recognition of my true value to the company we had created together. After careful consideration, I composed a brief reply. Richard, thank you for your message. Vertex Sphere continues to build on the foundation we created, though in ways that have evolved since the separation. I appreciate your acknowledgement of my contributions and accept your apology in the spirit it was offered. I wish you success in your future endeavors. Natalie, simple professional without rancor, but also without opening any doors to further engagement. As I sent the reply, I felt a subtle shift, the final release of lingering resentment I hadn't realized I still carried. The next morning brought another milestone. The board unanimously approved my proposal to implement an employee ownership program allocating a percentage of company shares to the team members who had built Vertex Sphere's success. The plan would vest over time, creating both incentives for retention and ensuring that those who contributed to our growth would share in the rewards. This decision, perhaps more than any other, represented the fundamental difference between Richard's vision for the company and mine. Where he had sought to concentrate ownership and control, I believed in distributing both more broadly, creating an organization where success was truly shared. As I announced the program at an impromptu gathering, I watched the reactions ripple through the assembled employees. Surprise giving way to genuine appreciation. Many had worked at companies where promises of shared success never materialized. The concrete plan with immediate implementation signaled a different approach. This isn't just about compensation, I explained. It's about recognizing that Vertex Sphere's value comes from the collective brilliance and dedication in this room. As shareholders, each of you has a tangible stake in our future success. The questions that followed were thoughtful and engaged about vesting schedules, allocation methodologies, and future expansion of the program. These weren't employees passively receiving a benefit, but stakeholders considering their investment in our shared enterprise. Later that week, a technology journalist interviewing me for a feature on women in cybersecurity asked what I considered my greatest accomplishment at Vertex Sphere. Building a company where innovation isn't dependent on any single person, I answered without hesitation. Where great ideas can come from anywhere in the organization and receive the support they need to flourish. Not the impressive growth numbers or major contracts, she pressed, seemingly surprised by my answer. Those are outcomes, not accomplishments, I explained. They result from creating an environment where brilliant people can do their best work without artificial hierarchies or political obstacles. The article, when published, highlighted this philosophy as distinctive in an industry often dominated by outsized egos and cult of personality leadership styles. Several competitors reached out afterward, interested in learning more about our approach to collaborative innovation. 1 year to the day after Richard had suspended me before the entire company, I stood on a stage accepting an industry award for Vertex Sphere's revolutionary approach to quantum-resistant encryption technology I had conceptualized during those early days when Richard and I had first dreamed of building something meaningful together. As I thanked our team and acknowledged the collaborative effort behind the innovation, I caught sight of Kevin in the audience alongside other members of our original development team. Their expressions reflected pride not just in the award, but in the journey we had taken together from crisis to transformation to growth. The company that Richard had tried to take from me had become something better than either of us had initially envisioned, not because I had won our power struggle, but because I had chosen a different model of leadership altogether, one based on shared ownership, transparent communication, and genuine recognition of contributions. The suspension that was meant to diminish me had instead revealed my true strength and capacity for leadership. The company I now owned had been transformed not through revenge, but through a vision of what business could be when built on mutual respect, rather than domination and control. As I left the stage with the award tangible proof of Vertex Sphere's technical leadership in the industry, I felt not triumph over Richard, but gratitude for the painful lesson that had ultimately freed both the company and me to become our best versions. Have you ever faced humiliation that ended up being the catalyst for your greatest growth? I'd love to hear your stories of turning points that seemed devastating, but ultimately led to something better. Drop a comment below, sharing how you transformed a professional setback into an opportunity, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, sometimes what looks like your lowest moment can become the foundation for your greatest success. Thank you for listening to my journey from public humiliation to unexpected empowerment.